Hey friends, welcome back to another video. My name's Lefebvre, and recently I've been doing a lot of teaching in person, and there are so many benefits to doing in-person workshops, especially with beginners, because then firsthand I get to see what the struggles are, the beginner tendencies are, and really how to help you out, as well as the beginners get me in person. So today I'm going to share with you one of the biggest not mistakes, but struggles or things that I see beginners do that can really hinder their work instead of help it. So today we're going to be covering that. So let's jump in and get started. Okay friends, so like I said, I've been teaching a lot in person and there's specific tendencies I am noticing with a lot of beginners, so I wanted to address those today. So today I have this palette that I used in one of my workshops. It is Winsor Newton Cotman watercolors from a tube that I've just squeezed in. They're completely bone dry. I just have some Hahnemühle watercolor paper here. I have a size 10 round brush, my water, and my paper towel. Now, the issue that I want to address is that I think as beginner artists, a lot of us have dabbled in acrylic or when we were kids, tempera paint. And with those types of paints, a lot of what you're using and focusing on is the paint. But with watercolor, it's completely different. Water is just as much, if not more important, not necessarily more, but just as important as paint. One does not work without the other. Okay, so I need you as a beginner to start viewing your water as an important supply when you're painting with your watercolors, just as much as your paint, as your paper, as your brushes. So I'm going to give you an example of what I've seen a lot of with a lot of beginners. So I have this brush. It's completely dry. And when I tell my students to, activate their paints by wetting it up, they'll dip their brush in once and then, start swishing around, right? What I need you to do is really soak your brush in your water. You want those bristles to really be wet. You don't want to just dip it in just a little bit. You really want to saturate your bristles with your water. And then when you go into your paint, the more water you add, the more it's going to activate. If you don't have a lot of water, you're going to notice once you start swishing around, the paint's going to become this thick consistency. And while that's great for getting really dark values and thick layers, that's not always the consistency that we're looking for with watercolor. Especially when you're painting with watercolor, you always want to start light to dark, meaning using more water to get lighter values and then working your way up with layers to get those darker values. But if you start like this is what I see a lot of. So they keep swishing, really activating that paint where it becomes like a thick paste. And then they'll go right in and it's really, really dark. Sometimes it's even just too thick where it's a little bit more on the dry side. Okay. And that is a way to use watercolor when we're adding those darker values or trying to get that thicker consistency. But for beginners, what I need them to do is really work on those lighter values and getting light washes, because that is one of the most important parts of watercolor. So the whole point is I need beginners to start using more water, okay? Use it as a tool. So what I suggest beginners do when they start is to grab your brush with lots of water and really create puddles in your paint. Now you can obviously grab a little spray tool, a spray bottle as well to activate your paints. But what you should have in there is a puddle. So right now there's not really a puddle. I'm just seeing kind of this thick paste forming and they just go around and round and round and round. Instead of adding more water, really trying to lift that paint. Okay, and that's going to be great for really dark values and creating thick layers. But what I want every beginner to start with is working with those lighter washes. So adding more water like this, and then even rinsing off your brush and just kind of tapping it in there to work on these really light values. Okay, in watercolor, we always work light to dark. And that's because watercolor is a transparent medium. You cannot layer light colors on top of darker colors because it's transparent, it's see-through. So what we do in watercolor, unlike acrylic or oil, where you can basically paint a background black, and then, you know, once it's dry, or not even when it's dry, you can start painting over it with even a white, and you can work on those highlights. In watercolor, you focus on the highlighted areas first, the lighter values, and then you go back in with your darker washes. So one way that I've seen a lot of artists kind of explain the different values is this tea to butter consistency while looking at how much water you're adding to your paint. I don't really think that way. I've never really referred to anything as tea to butter, but I feel like it resonates with a lot of beginners. So I'm going to kind of just go over that. And this is something that I want beginners to kind of start practicing, because working on those lighter values and lighter washes and really utilizing your water is such an important part of watercolor painting. So essentially, tea to butter is referring to the consistency. Tea meaning it's very, very watered down. So here you can actually see I have a puddle in my purple. Okay. Now this puddle is going to help create those really light values. And if you're not sure how light it is, you can always move it to a different well. You can even tap it on your paper towel to see. And tea just means that there is more water to paint ratio, okay? So you should be getting a really nice light value like this. So when I'm talking about value, I'm referring to the lightness or darkness of a color. So this is a light value. So this would be considered tea, where it's very watered down, very transparent. The next step would be a coffee-like consistency, where it's a little bit darker. So you can really kind of just tap your brush in there, bring it over here to your mixing well, and it's slightly darker. Now, one thing I see beginners do when they pick up paint, they go like this, they like dig in there. And what that does is you lift a lot of color. When you're going back into your color, you really only have to take the tip of your brush to pick up some of that color. You don't need to swish it around too much. If anything, I'd rather you swish it around in your water to pick up more water. Okay, so the next one would be like a coffee consistency. See how it's slightly darker? Okay, we have tea and then coffee. Next one would be milk, I believe. So I'm going to swish my brush in my water, or in my paint, a little bit more. Bring it over here just to look at the color. Give it a swatch right next to it. And the milk should be a little bit thicker. Okay, a little bit thicker, a little bit darker. Then the next one, I believe they refer to it as cream. So I'm going to swish it in a little bit more. Okay, I'm not really adding any water. I'm just picking up more paint. And we should have a darker value, which would be cream. And then the last one is going to be butter. Butter is that thick, thick, thick consistency. This is where you can go to town, really, and just swish it in there, not a lot of water, and you're really picking up that pigment. And it's almost dry. See how I'm getting kind of like a drier edge? This would be butter. And this would be if you're really trying to layer like a dark color over top and get that darkest value possible. So practicing this, which is a value scale from light to dark or dark to light, is really going to help you kind of gauge your water to paint ratio. Now, you'll notice if you follow a lot of my videos, I use my light values the most, and I like to slowly build up. But what I am noticing with a lot of beginners when I'm teaching, say like tulips or flowers, they'll go into their paint and really pick up all that pigment, and they'll start painting. The problem with this is then once it's so dark, you really have nowhere else to go to build depth within your flowers and your paintings. This is not a good example of a tulip, but there's really nowhere to go. You can't layer much darkness over a dark value as it is. What you want to be doing is practicing those lighter values. So I'm just rinsing off my brush where I just have a tiny bit of pigment, and you really want to work on those lighter values, because then from here, once it dries, you can build up those shadows, or even you can do some wet on wet. I can grab a little bit more of our darker value. Okay, a darker, maybe starting off with our tea, then getting some coffee or milk, and then you tap it into the bottom, and already it's creating some depth within your flower and some shadow, which is really going to give it that beautiful contrast that we're looking for. If I do that over here, you can't really build up. I could grab a darker color, but even still, it's just very, very saturated. And what you really want to build up is a lot of that contrast within your work. So I'll have lots of light petals and stuff like that. And then maybe I will grab more, say, green. You can grab that darker value or your cream consistency and have that contrast of a dark value and a light value. But if you have dark and dark, it just doesn't give the same consistency. Now, if you put these two together, you have one that's a lot darker and one that's a lot lighter in the same painting. That's a really nice contrast. But if your whole painting is very, very saturated with color, it doesn't give that same effect. So, my beginners, I don't want you to be afraid of using water, okay? Really, water is one of the most important tools with watercolor painting. Create those puddles. Now see, I used a bunch of water, but it's also very, very dark. Okay, what I would do to create that lighter wash, rinse off my brush a bit, maybe tap it on here, and get those lighter values. Okay, so that's one of the biggest kind of mistakes I see with beginners, or I don't like to say mistakes. One of the biggest like tendencies that I see that beginners do, they really try and lift the paint out of those wells to use a thick amount of it, but you don't need to do that with watercolor. Now, the only thing that could really not go wrong, but could cause a little bit of issues with using too much water is water control can be a tricky thing. So when you have too much water on your paper, the drying time for your paint, so say you have one area that dries really quick and one that still has a puddle, that's going to cause something called blooms, and it causes these hard edges. Now, one way to combat that is to use 100% cotton paper like this. I used quite a bit of water on this, and what 100% cotton paper does is it really holds in the water and soaks it in slowly, so you have more time to work with those wet pigments. If you use a paper like this one, which is my Canson XL sketchbook, it is not 100% cotton. It's like a cellulose paper. It doesn't hold the water as well. So when you use too much water, you're going to get these puddles, and you're going to have areas that dry faster than others, and then you're going to start to get harsh lines. So I am telling you to use a lot of water, but when you're using a paper like this, you need to kind of manipulate it in a different way. So I'm going to see if I can get this to dry so I can show you those harsh edges I'm talking about. But when you're working with a paper like this, you can still use a lot of water. So I'm just going to mix all the colors in my palette here. You can still use a lot of water to lighten your colors, okay? But use it in your palette instead of on your paper. Okay, mix those light values. And then with this kind of paper, what I would do, instead of going right into painting where that water is going to sit there, I would dry off my brush a bit on my paper towel, then pick up my lighter values. And I'm using less of the water and paint to get that lightness without creating those puddles. See how you can see this dark area here? That's a puddle. That's going to dry a bit differently than this. This is going to be a nice smooth wash because there's less water. This one is going to start drying. I can already tell it's going to start drying over here. There's going to remain a puddle here. We're going to get a harsh line. You can already start to see it kind of happening here. We're getting a harsher line because this part is starting to dry. This is remaining wet. So the only thing with using too much water that can make it a bit more difficult is that you can create those harsher lines when you're using like a cellulose paper. You'll have less of this trouble on a good quality cotton paper. So you might want to invest into that. down the line when you feel a bit more confident. But the way to use it on this kind of paper, create your light washes, your tea consistency in your palette, then dry your brush off and just pick up a little bit. You don't have to swish around, just pick up a little bit, then use it, okay? Now, if you do use a lot of water on your painting, this is fine. You can fix this super easily, okay? What I want you to notice is the puddles that are being created. If you notice a puddle on your page and you have that risk of, see how it's already happening right before our eyes? If you have that risk of those harsh lines, all you have to do, dry your brush on your paper towel and just move your brush over the area, dab it a bit more, and you're basically just soaking up those puddles, and you should have a nice flat wash. So that's how you can really help prevent this from happening on the cheaper paper. But using higher quality paper will really help combat that. It's still going to happen. Like, I can still see there's a puddle here, and you're going to risk the unevenness of the drying time. But that's okay. Again, like I said, all you have to do is just go over the whole thing, kind of mop it up with your brush, and you won't have that issue. Okay? But the one thing I do want beginners to really practice is not being afraid of water. Okay? Don't spend your time activating your colors with a little bit of water and picking up as much paint as possible in the beginning. I need you to add more water. Okay? More water, and just touch it a little bit. Practice getting those light values. Practice the tea to butter consistency, the value scale. And then if you feel like you have too much water on your paper, just go over it. Mop it up like so. Okay, so give that a try. Master those light values, master those value scales, and I guarantee you'll become a better artist. I hope that was insightful. I hope that was helpful. And I will see you in our next video. Thank you all so much for watching. I really hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you learned something. Don't forget to subscribe to this channel and follow me on all my other platforms for tons more content. Have a wonderful day, guys. Bye.